I'm John Manzella, and this is the Manzella Report. Policymakers can use two basic strategies to attract manufacturing investment. The carrot, which includes subsidies, grants, and tax credits, or the stick, which includes tariffs and threats. Using credible data that tells a compelling story, I'll explain why the carrot is much more effective than the stick. The St. Louis Federal Reserve publishes data that reveals actual investments made in new or expanded manufacturing facilities. It's called Total Construction Spending Manufacturing in the United States. Now, during the Biden administration, from January 2021 through January 2025, this spending tripled from $76.5 billion to $230.9 billion and was primarily driven by President Biden's CHIPS and Science Act. Using carefully crafted subsidies, grants, loans, and tax credits, the CHIPS Act was successful in attracting big investment into semiconductor, battery, and advanced manufacturing projects, and represented one of the largest industrial construction booms in U.S. history, creating an entire ecosystem of suppliers, workers, and innovation. In fact, stated by the Semiconductor Industry Association, the CHIPS Act was a pivotal moment in recent American history, reinvigorating U.S. semiconductor production and reinforcing America's economic strength, national security, and technological competitiveness. Other helpful carrots included the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. As a result of these carrots, the message was clear. America is open for business. This approach made investing in American critical manufacturing sectors very attractive. Beginning with President Trump's second term through October 2025, which is the latest available data, construction spending in manufacturing declined to $214.1 billion. Now, there are a couple of explanations for this. During the Biden administration, manufacturing construction spending peaked in June 2024 at $240.1 billion, then slowed during the end of his term. This increase in dip is primarily due to mega project investment cycles, which are front-loaded with capital-intensive spending on massive construction phases, followed by less capital-intensive spending on things like machinery and equipment. Consequently, some of the investment decline in President Trump's second term can be attributed to these less capital-intensive phases. However, the much more likely and primary explanation is trade uncertainty caused by President Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs, delays, reversals, and threats, or, in other words, the stick. There are many examples of the stick in action. Take South Korea, for example. On Liberation Day, April 2nd, 2025, President Trump announced tariffs on South Korea up to 25%, which critics argued was inconsistent with the 2012 U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. 3 months later, on July 30, 2025, the two countries announced the Korean Strategic Trade and Investment Deal, with the understanding that South Korea would invest $350 billion in the U.S. and tariffs would be reduced to 15%. 2 months after that, on September 4th, 2025, ICE raided the construction site of the South Korean Hyundai Motor Group LG Energy Solutions battery plant in Georgia and detained South Korean nationals, many of whom were engineers and technicians training American workers and installing specialized machinery with, I might add, proper visas. Even though the South Korean workers were ultimately allowed to complete their jobs, most decided to leave due to unpleasant experiences of being shackled, treated like criminals, and unsure if they could trust the visa process. In response, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung said, under the current circumstances, Korean companies will be very hesitant to make direct investments in the U.S. The problems didn't end there. In January 2026, President Trump announced that because the South Korean National Assembly had not yet passed legislation for the trade and investment deal, he would raise tariffs back to 25%. These chaotic tariffs, threats, and Georgia ICE action has caused economic uncertainty to skyrocket. As a result, firms have become more cautious about committing to long-term capital projects in the U.S. and hitting the pause button. According to statements from the Brookings Institution and American Institute of Architects, allies are receiving mixed signals. The South Korean case has made countries like Japan and even EU nations nervous, and lack of tariff clarity has encouraged inaction. Not surprisingly, industry forecasts predict a continued decline in manufacturing construction spending. If the U.S. wishes to attract manufacturing investment, especially in critical industries, we need to focus more on carrots and less on sticks. And this is especially urgent given greater competition and potentially higher tensions with China. America's advanced manufacturing and our overall competitiveness depends on reliable and necessary global supply chains, which calls for not alienating but strengthening our relationships with our allies. The choice is clear. We can invest in our future through strategic incentives and stable partnerships, or watch critical manufacturing investments go to more predictable shores. This may be a tall order, but it's absolutely necessary. For detailed analysis on this subject, read my article in Fair Observer magazine or visit the Manzella report. Thank you.